Here's a shocking and intriguing hook script for your video introduction. Imagine the world's first true cities, towering ziggurats piercing the sky, bustling markets echoing with invention, and the very dawn of written history unfolding. This was Sumeria, the cradle of civilization. But then, an unspeakable silence fell. It wasn't just invaders, or even famine. No, the horrifying truth about the fall of the Sumerian cities is a story far darker, a collapse so chillingly complete, you'll question everything you thought you knew about ancient endings. Hey guys, tonight we travel back over 4,000 years, to a place where civilization itself was still a bold new experiment. We're standing on a sun-baked street in the heart of Mesopotamia, in one of the world's very first true cities. The air is thick with the smell of roasting barley and river silt, and towering over everything is a man-made mountain of brick, a stairway to the heavens for gods you've never met. This is the city of Uar, the jewel of Sumer, and it is living on borrowed time. The people walking past you, with their kohl-rimmed eyes and fringed wool skirts, have no idea that their entire world is about to be washed away by forces they cannot comprehend. Frankly, if you were one of them, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The heat hits you first. It's not a gentle warmth, it's a physical presence, a heavy blanket of dry, shimmering air that presses down from a bleached white sky. You're in southern Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And right now, you stand within the protective embrace of Uar, one of the oldest and most magnificent cities the world has ever known. The year is somewhere around 2050 BC. And this is the beating heart of a powerful empire. From your vantage point, the city is a labyrinth of honey-colored, mud-brick houses, packed so tightly together that their flat roofs almost form a continuous, uneven canopy above the narrow, winding streets. Personal space hasn't quite been invented yet. That would come much, much later, probably right around the time of the first major plague. For now, the streets below are a river of humanity. A chaotic and yet harmonious flow of merchants shouting their wares, priests in their stark white linen, and soldiers whose bronze-tipped spears glint in the relentless sun. You can hear the city's pulse. It's a low, constant hum of activity. The rhythmic clink, clink, clink of a metalsmith's hammer, the gentle bleating of sheep being herded through a gate, the distant rumble of chariot wheels on a section of stone-paved road, and the soft, scraping sound of a scribe's reed stylus on a wet clay tablet. This city, and the Sumerian civilization it represents, is the capital of the third dynasty of Uar, a bureaucratic and cultural powerhouse. They are organized, they are literate, and they believe they are the center of the known universe. Looming over it all, impossible to ignore, is the ziggurat. It's a colossal step pyramid, a man-made mountain rising in 3 massive terraces toward the heavens. At its summit sits a small shrine, the dwelling place of the city's patron deity, the moon god Nana. This isn't just a church, it's the spiritual, economic, and administrative core of the state. Grain taxes are stored in its shadow, legal disputes are settled at its base, and the fate of the empire is divined within its sacred precinct. Historians still argue whether the great ziggurats were purely religious temples or also served as vast administrative centers and celestial observatories, a sort of divine IRS building with a much better view. Whatever its full purpose, its presence is a constant, humbling reminder to every citizen. The gods are watching. You wander away from the main thoroughfare, down a smaller alley where the shade offers a brief respite from the sun's glare. Through an open doorway, you see a quiet domestic scene. 2 men are sitting on woven reed mats in a small, private courtyard. Between them is a beautifully crafted wooden board, inlaid with shell and lapis lazuli. They are playing the royal game of Uar, a pastime already ancient by their standards. They toss small, four-sided dice and move their pieces along the board with a quiet intensity, a moment of peaceful competition that has been played out in this city for centuries. It's a disarming scene of normalcy, of life simply being lived. But if you look closer, beyond the vibrant markets and the sacred rituals, you can feel a subtle tension in the air, an anxiety that hums just beneath the surface of daily life. The harvests for the last few years have been thinner. The river, the lifeblood Euphrates that feeds the intricate network of irrigation canals, seems a little lower, a little slower than the old men remember from their youth. And from the north and west, from the harsh Zagros mountains and the endless Syrian steppe, there are whispers, stories of new people, rougher people, being pushed from their lands by a deep and persistent drought. They are called the Amorites, and the Sumerians speak of them with a mixture of fear and contempt. They are seen as barbarians who know nothing of cities, of writing, of gods who live in proper houses. For now, they are just a distant rumor. For now, the massive, big brick walls of Ur, wide enough for two chariots to ride abreast, feel like more than enough protection. The people here believe their prosperity is divinely ordained, their city eternal. They have no idea that they are standing at the precipice, that the game they are playing isn't on a small wooden board, but a grand, terrifying one of climate, salt, and human desperation. Their entire world is a magnificent house of cards, and a dry wind has started to blow. But for now, that unease is just a whisper on a wind that hasn't arrived yet. The sun climbs higher, and the city of Ur awakens in earnest. The day begins. You follow the flow of people back toward the harbor district, a chaotic and thrilling part of the city where the canals meet the bustling land routes. This is the economic engine of the empire, and it roars to life at dawn. The air is thick with the smells of damp reeds, drying fish, and the sharp, dusty scent of imported cedar wood from Lebanon. Long, narrow barges, guided by men with long poles, navigate the crowded waterways, their holds filled with essentials. Huge sacks of barley from the fertile fields upstream, massive jugs of sesame oil, and bundles of wool that will soon be spun and woven into the fringed garments worn by everyone around you. The marketplace, or ganba, is an explosion of sensory information. Merchants sit on low stools behind piles of their goods, shouting out prices not in coins, which haven't been invented yet, but in measures of barley or shekels of silver. You see a woman with intricate tattoos on her arms arguing passionately with a farmer over a basket of dates, her gestures sharp and animated. Nearby, a man from a far-off land, perhaps Dilmun on the Persian Gulf, displays gleaming copper ingots, their reddish glow a sign of incredible wealth. A mainstream historical fact for you: the Sumerians were master traders. Their civilization ran on a complex network that brought lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan and carnelian from the Indus Valley, all the way to this very market, thousands of miles away. It was the first truly globalized economy, and trying to return a defective copper pot was probably just as frustrating then as it is now. You wander into the craftsman's quarter. Here, the air hums with productive energy. In one open-fronted workshop, a potter sits at a slow, foot-powered wheel, his hands slick with wet clay as he expertly coaxes a lump of earth into a graceful jug. Next door, the sharp smell of hot metal fills the air as a smith and his apprentice hammer a bronze axe-head into shape, the rhythmic clang of their work providing a steady beat for the neighborhood. And everywhere, there are weavers. Women sit in shaded courtyards, their fingers flying across large, upright looms, creating intricate patterns in wool and linen. This isn't just a hobby, it's a state-controlled industry. The temple bureaucracy would issue rations of wool to thousands of female weavers, who in turn produced textiles that were a primary export, a key source of the empire's wealth. Feeling the imaginary pangs of Sumerian hunger, you watch as a baker pulls flat, round loaves of barley bread from a beehive-shaped clay oven. This, along with onions, garlic, and a handful of dried fish, is the staple diet. But the true cornerstone of Sumerian cuisine and indeed its society, is beer. Everyone drank it, from the king in his palace to the laborer digging an irrigation ditch. It was nutritious, calorie-dense, and a much safer option than drinking river water, which could be teeming with unpleasant things. In fact, beer was so fundamental that it was often used as a form of payment. A standard worker's ration was about a liter of beer a day. So next time you enjoy a cold one after a long day at work, you're participating in a tradition that's at least 5,000 years old. Curious about private life, you slip down a quiet residential alley. The houses present blank, windowless walls to the street, a feature designed for privacy and to keep out the daytime heat. You enter through a single wooden door into a central, open-air courtyard, the heart of the home. Rooms branch off from this central space, providing shade and a surprising coolness. On the flat roof above, you can see rolled-up sleeping mats, ready for the hot nights when the family would sleep under the stars. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. The Sumerians kept their ancestors very, very close. It was common practice to bury deceased family members in a brick-lined vault right under the floor of the main courtyard. It was their way of maintaining a connection with their lineage, ensuring the spirits of their loved ones remain part of the household. It certainly gives a whole new meaning to having the in-laws over for dinner. As the afternoon sun begins to dip, a change comes over the city. A procession of priests, clad in clean white linen and shaved-headed to show their purity, emerges from the temple complex. The sound of a high-pitched flute and the deep thrum of a bullhide drum cut through the city's hum. They carry statues of lesser deities on wooden platforms, winding their way through the main streets. The smell of cedar and myrrh incense follows in their wake. This is the public face of religion, a constant reminder of the pact between humanity and the gods. The people of UR believed their very purpose was to serve the deities, to provide them with food, drink, housing, and entertainment. In return, the gods would maintain order in the cosmos and ensure the two rivers flooded just enough to make the land fertile. Historians still argue whether the average citizen truly felt a personal connection to these grand, state-level gods, or if their daily worship was more focused on personal household spirits and the veneration of their buried ancestors. For now, the ceremony is a grand piece of theater, reassuring everyone that all is well, the covenant is being upheld, and the great city is safe and blessed. As dusk settles, the ziggurat is once again silhouetted against a darkening sky, a silent guardian watching over a city that feels, for this one perfect day, completely and utterly eternal. The procession with its drums and incense fades into the distance, and you find yourself drawn toward the immense structures at the base of the ziggurat. This is the Igishirgal, the administrative heart of the empire. You pass through a heavily guarded gateway into a series of interconnected courtyards and long, dim halls. The air here is different. It's cooler, quieter, and smells of dust and dry clay. The noise of the city is muted, replaced by a soft, persistent scratching and tapping. This is the nerve center, the brain of UR, and it runs on a revolutionary technology writing. You peer into a long room. Dozens of men and a few women are seated on low benches or cross-legged on the floor. In one hand, they hold a small, damp pillow of clay, about the size of your palm. In the other, they hold a stylus, a small piece of reed cut to a triangular tip. With intense concentration, they press the tip of the stylus into the clay, creating small, wedge-shaped marks. This is cuneiform, the world's first true system of writing. And these people are the world's first bureaucrats, the gears in a vast administrative machine. The sheer volume of their work is staggering. Along the walls, clay shelves are stacked high with thousands of these tablets, organized and categorized with a precision that would make a modern librarian weep with joy. This is the birthplace of paperwork, and it seems they'd already discovered the soul-crushing joy of filling things out in triplicate. You pick up a finished tablet that has been set out to dry in the sun. It's surprisingly heavy, solid. The marks are intricate and abstract. What started centuries ago as simple pictures, a head of barley to mean barley, a drawing of a head to mean person, has evolved into a complex system of hundreds of signs representing syllables and concepts. A mainstream historical fact is that this shift from pictographs to abstract, phonetic signs is what allowed the Sumerians to record not just things, but complex ideas, laws, contracts, and even literature. They could now write down spoken language, a leap as significant as the invention of the microchip. What are they all writing? You watch one scribe as he rapidly makes his marks. He's not composing an epic poem or recording the deeds of a great king. He is an accountant. This tablet is a receipt for a shipment of 27 goats delivered to the temple kitchens. The one next to it is a work roster, detailing the beer and grain rations for a gang of laborers digging a new canal. Another is a legal contract, recording the sale of a small plot of land, complete with the names of witnesses and the official seal of the presiding temple authority rolled into the clay. This entire empire, with its grand armies, towering monuments, and far-flung trade, is held together by these mundane little records. It's a civilization built on receipts. So who are these scribes? They are the educated elite, the original knowledge workers. Their training was long and brutal, taking place in a school called the Dubba, or Tablet House. A quirky tidbit from recovered school texts reveals that student life was no picnic. We have tablets where students complain about their teachers, their difficult assignments, and the constant threat of being caned for a poorly formed wedge or sloppy handwriting. One text, a sort of Sumerian high school comedy, describes a day in the life of a student. He gets up. His mom packs him 2 rolls for lunch. He goes to school, gets caned for talking, caned for poor penmanship, caned for standing up without permission. It's a tough gig, but a necessary one. Literacy was the key to power and influence. Historians still argue whether becoming a scribe was a genuine pathway for social mobility. Could a farmer's clever son really rise through the ranks to become a high-ranking official, or was the Adubba primarily reserved for the sons of the wealthy and powerful, a way of perpetuating their family's control over the levers of the state? The evidence is ambiguous, but what is certain is that without this class of literate administrators, the Sumerian state could not function. They managed the complex irrigation systems, tracked every jar of oil, every bushel of wheat, every ounce of silver that flowed into and out of the temple treasuries. This is the genius of Sumer. They created a system of such complexity and order that it could manage the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. But here, in this quiet room of tapping styluses, you can also see its profound fragility. This entire intricate web of administration, this operating system for civilization, is built on one fundamental assumption: that the barley will grow, the sheep will fatten, and the rivers will deliver their life-giving water. The tablets record the flow of surplus, but they have no power to create it. The bureaucracy can manage prosperity, but it is utterly helpless in the face of genuine scarcity. Right now, this system feels robust, unshakable. But if the foundation of agriculture that supports it begins to crumble, these neat stacks of tablets will become nothing more than a precise, detailed archive of a collapse. They will be a perfect record of how a great society starved to death, one goat, one bushel of barley at a time. The system is a marvel, but like any complex software, it's prone to a catastrophic crash if the hardware fails. Leaving the quiet hum of the archives behind, you move deeper into the sacred precinct at the foot of the ziggurat. The very air here feels different, charged with a palpable sense of holiness and awe. You are approaching the earthly homes of the gods, and in Sumer, the gods are not distant, abstract concepts. They are neighbors, demanding, powerful, and terrifyingly fickle neighbors, but neighbors nonetheless. Their presence is as real to the people of Uar as the heat of the sun and the mud of the river. The Sumerian pantheon is a sprawling, dysfunctional family of superbeings. At the top, you have figures like An, the distant god of the sky, and Enki, the clever and cunning god of freshwater, wisdom, and magic. But the one who truly holds the fate of humanity in his hands is Enlil, the god of wind, air, and earth. He is the king of the gods, the one who grants kingship to mortals, and he has a notoriously short temper. He is powerful, majestic, and prone to wiping out entire cities if they make too much noise and disturb his nap. That's not a joke. In their creation epic, the Atrahasis, Enlil gets so irritated by the racket of a growing human population that he first sends a plague, then a drought, and finally the Great Flood to try and get some peace and quiet. This brings us to a core tenet of Sumerian belief, a mainstream historical fact that framed their entire existence. Humans were created for one purpose only, to be the slaves of the gods. The myths tell of a time when the lesser gods had to do all the work, digging the canals, tilling the fields, and they got tired of it. So the clever god Enki devised a solution: create a new, lesser being to do the grunt work. And so humanity was fashioned from clay, mixed with the blood of a slain god, and set to work. Your purpose, as a Sumerian, is not to seek personal enlightenment or a blissful afterlife. Your purpose is to serve, to provide the gods with everything they need, so they can get on with the important business of running the cosmos. And they need a lot. You watch as a line of priests, barefoot and robed in spotless linen, carry platters of food toward a sealed, gilded door. This is the entrance to the inner sanctum, the bedroom of the moon god Nana. Inside that room is a statue of the god, crafted from precious wood and adorned with gold and lapis lazuli. But to the priests, this is no mere idol. After a series of powerful rituals, this statue becomes the physical manifestation of Nana on earth. It is a living deity, and it requires daily care. Here's a quirky tidbit. This care was incredibly elaborate. The god statue was woken in the morning with music, its clothes were changed, and it was washed by priests. Then came the meals. The platters you see hold the finest food the empire can produce: roasted mutton, succulent fruits, fresh bread, and jugs of the best beer. The food is placed before the statue in the sealed room, and the god mystically consumes its essence. After a while, the doors are opened, and the leftovers are distributed among the priests and temple staff. It was, without a doubt, the best meal plan in the city. Historians still argue whether the high priest saw this as a literal feeding of a divine being, or as a sophisticated form of ritual theater designed to consolidate the temple's economic power by collecting and redistributing the land's finest produce. This belief system creates a very particular kind of anxiety. Since the god lives in the temple, his presence is the city's divine shield. Nana's favor is what makes Uar's armies victorious, its merchants wealthy, and its fields fertile. But this favor is not guaranteed. The gods are not tied to a city by love or loyalty. They are tied to it by the quality of the service. If the offerings falter, if the rituals are performed incorrectly, or if the people of the city become wicked or impure, the god can become disgusted. And this is the horrifying truth at the heart of their religion. A disgusted god can and will leave. The Sumerians believed their divine statues could pack their celestial bags and simply abandon their city. The god would literally withdraw its divine presence, leaving the temple an empty shell and the city naked and vulnerable before the universe. This is the ultimate catastrophe, that it's not just a spiritual crisis. It's a geopolitical and ecological one. A city without its patron god is cursed. Its walls will fall, its fields will turn to salt, its people will starve, and its enemies will swarm over the ruins. Every misfortune, from a failed crop to a military defeat, could be interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure, a warning that the god was getting ready to walk out. It's like living with a landlord who is also a nuclear weapon. You spend every waking moment terrified of annoying him. So as you stand there, in the shadow of the ziggurat, you realize the immense psychological pressure on the people of Uar. Their entire civilization is a frantic, ongoing effort to keep their divine neighbors happy. The bureaucracy, the scribes, the farmers, the soldiers, everyone's work is ultimately part of this cosmic maintenance project. They must be vigilant, pious, and productive, lest they wake up one day to find their god has vanished, taking all of their luck and all of their hope with him. The wind picks up for a moment, rattling the fronds of a nearby date palm. It feels like a sigh, or a warning, and you realize that when the real crisis comes, they won't look for a scientific or a political cause. They will look to the heavens and conclude, with terrifying certainty, that the gods have found them wanting. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The rhythmic life of UR continues, but you can feel a subtle shift. You are now a few years further into the future. The harvests have been leaner still, and the whispers from the mountains are no longer whispers. They are becoming anxious shouts in the marketplaces and worried murmurs in the halls of power. You sense the first real crack appearing in the magnificent facade of the Sumerian world. This is the coming of the Gudians. Who are the Gudians? To the scribes and priests of UR, they are the embodiment of chaos. They are a loose confederation of tribes from the rugged Zagros Mountains to the northeast, a people with no cities, no writing, and, in the Sumerian view, no civilization. Sumerian texts describe them in the most contemptuous terms possible. A people who know no order, who have the instincts of a wolf, the intelligence of a mountain goat. They are the ultimate other, the boogeymen from the hills. For centuries, they were a peripheral nuisance, occasionally raiding a remote settlement before melting back into their mountain strongholds. But now something has changed. They are becoming more organized, more aggressive, and they are pushing down onto the plains in force. Historians still argue about what truly set the Gudians in motion. Was it the pressure of the same encroaching climate change that was beginning to affect Sumer, drying out their high pastures and forcing them to seek new lands? Or was it a more complex political shift, a charismatic new leader uniting the tribes for the first time? Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. They begin to disrupt the vital trade routes that bring essential goods like timber, stone, and metal into Sumer. A caravan that was expected last week is now a month overdue, and rumors circulate that it was ambushed and looted in the northern passes. The price of bronze begins to creep upwards in the UR marketplace. A mainstream historical fact is that the Gudian invasion brought down the previous great Mesopotamian empire, the Akkadian Empire, about a century before our story in UR begins. They were not just a minor threat. They had a proven track record of toppling giants. The Sumerians of UR's third dynasty remember this history well. It's their equivalent of the fall of Rome, a cautionary tale about what happens when barbarians are allowed to get the upper hand. The fear of the Gudians is therefore not just prejudice. It's rooted in recent, traumatic memory. You find yourself near the northern gate of the city. A small detachment of soldiers is marching out, their bronze helmets and leather shields gleaming in the fading light. They are not a grand army marching to a glorious battle. They are a patrol, being sent to reinforce a distant outpost that has reported an increase in raiding activity. Their faces are grim. Fighting in the open plains against a conventional army is one thing. Chasing elusive, guerrilla-style warriors in the foothills is another entirely. The Gudians don't fight fair. They don't line up in neat formations. They strike fast, loot what they can, and vanish. It's a frustrating and costly kind of warfare that bleeds an empire through 1,000 small cuts. Here's a quirky tidbit about how the Sumerians perceive these barbarians. One Sumerian text, known as the Curse of Akkad, is a piece of propaganda that blames the Gudians for every conceivable ill. It claims that after they conquered the old Akkadian capital, the courier could not travel the road, the boatman could not sail the river, the fields were not irrigated, no grain was grown, the great gates were afflicted with dust. This paints them as a force of pure entropy, an anti-civilization that actively undoes all the hard work of the Sumerians. It's fascinating because it shows how a society defines itself by what it is not. The Sumerians are orderly. The Gudians are chaotic. Sumerians are agriculturalists. Gudians are destructive nomads. It's a powerful narrative, and a useful one for a king trying to rally his people against an external threat. But the threat is also internal. The Gudian presence disrupts the delicate balance of power between the Sumerian city-states. A city like Lagash, closer to the mountains, might be forced to pay tribute to a local Gudian warlord, a humiliating but pragmatic choice. This is seen as a betrayal by the more powerful city of Uar, which tries to maintain a unified front. The king of Uar sends messengers demanding loyalty and soldiers for the common defense, but the responses he gets are increasingly evasive. The fear of the Gudians is slowly dissolving the political glue that holds the empire together. You watch as the patrol disappears into the dusty twilight. The heavy bronze-banded gate of the city swings shut behind them with a groaning finality. The sound echoes through the streets. For the first time, the mighty walls of Uar don't feel entirely like a symbol of strength. They feel defensive. The mood in the city has subtly soured. The old confidence is being eroded by a persistent, nagging fear. The problem is no longer just a rumor from a distant land. It's at their doorstep. The world outside the walls is becoming more dangerous, more unpredictable, and the people of Uar are beginning to realize that their meticulously organized world is not as secure as they once believed. The first crack has appeared, and the pressure is building. Just when it seems the pressure from the Gudian threat and the creeping environmental worries might splinter the Sumerian world for good, something remarkable happens. The pendulum swings. You are now standing in the midst of a renaissance, a brief, dazzling flare of renewed glory for Sumer. The Gudians, for a time, are driven back. A new dynasty rises, the third dynasty of Uar, and under its founder, a king named Uarnamu, Sumerian civilization reaches its zenith. This is the last golden age. The city of Uar is transformed. The air buzzes with an energy not of anxiety, but of ambitious construction. Everywhere you look, there's a renewal. Uarnamu is a master of both war and public relations, and he initiates a massive building program across his reunified kingdom. The great ziggurat of Uar, which had perhaps fallen into disrepair, is rebuilt and expanded to the colossal form you first saw. You watch as thousands of laborers, organized in the classic Sumerian way with overseers and ration lists, haul countless baked bricks up massive ramps. The sound of construction is the new anthem of the city. This isn't just a repair job, it's a statement. It's Uarnamu telling the world, and more importantly, telling the gods, that Sumer is back. The gods will be housed in splendor. The proper order has been restored. You wander through the bustling streets, and the prosperity is tangible. The markets are overflowing with goods again. The trade routes, secured by Uarnamu's armies, are reopened. You see merchants haggling over high-quality cedar from Lebanon, shimmering carnelian beads from the far-off Indus Valley, and hefty ingots of copper from Magan, a land believed to be modern-day Oman. The state workshops are running at full capacity, churning out exquisite jewelry, finely woven textiles, and masterfully crafted weapons. The renewed sense of security and wealth inspires a burst of artistic and cultural creativity. Uarnamu is not just a builder, he is a lawgiver. In the great archive, you see scribes carefully making copies of a new document, one of the most important in human history. This is the Code of Uarnamu, a mainstream historical fact. This is the oldest surviving law code in the world, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by about 3 centuries. It's not a list of brutal, eye-for-an-eye punishments. Instead, it is surprisingly sophisticated. If a man knocks out another man's tooth, he shall pay 2 shekels of silver. If a man divorces his first wife, he shall pay her 1 mina of silver. The laws deal with everything from witchcraft accusations to runaway slaves to agricultural disputes. The goal is not vengeance, but restitution and order. It's an attempt to create a just society, to prove that Sumerian civilization is not just powerful, but also fair. It's a legal bedrock for the empire, designed to unify the various cities under a single, predictable standard of justice. This period also sees a flowering of Sumerian literature. In a quiet courtyard, you might see a master scribe teaching his students, not by having them copy ration lists, but by having them meticulously transcribe ancient myths and epic poems. Stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh are written down in their most complete forms. Royal hymns are composed, praising Uarnamu and his son, Shulgi, comparing them to gods and legendary heroes of the past. It's a conscious effort to create a national identity, to connect this new dynasty with the glorious, semi-mythical history of Sumer. They are saying, "We are the rightful heirs to this ancient legacy." Here's a quirky tidbit about the founder of this golden age, Uarnamu. Despite his immense success in reunifying Sumer and his grand building projects, his end was tragically mundane. A royal hymn laments his death in vivid detail. He wasn't assassinated in his palace or struck down by a rival king in a climatic battle. He was killed in action, likely during a skirmish with the Gudians, and his body was abandoned on the battlefield. The poem describes the profound shock and grief that rippled through the kingdom. The great king, who had restored the world, was left in the dust of the battlefield like a broken pot. His royal chariot was spattered with his own blood. It's a poignant and very human end to a legendary reign, a stark reminder that even at the height of their power, they were still vulnerable. Historians still argue about the true nature of this Sumerian Renaissance. Was it a genuine, bottom-up resurgence of cultural and economic strength? Or was it a top-down, state-engineered illusion of stability, a massive expenditure of resources by a new, highly centralized government to legitimize its rule? The level of state control was unprecedented. The king, Shulgi, who succeeded Uarnamu, created a bureaucracy so vast and detailed that it would make the scribes you saw earlier look like amateurs. He standardized weights and measures, created a national calendar, and organized the empire into provinces ruled by governors who answered directly to him. This intense centralization makes the empire incredibly efficient, but also incredibly brittle. The entire system now depends on the strength and competence of one man in Uar. For now, under the powerful and long-lived Shulgi, the system works brilliantly. The granaries are full, the temples are gleaming, and the enemies are kept at bay. The empire feels strong, stable, eternal. This golden age is so bright, so confident, that it blinds them to the deep, systemic problems that haven't gone away. The salt is still creeping into the soil. The climate is still changing. And out in the arid west, a new group of people, the Amorites, are growing in number, pushed by forces that no king, no matter how powerful, can control. This dazzling renaissance is, in truth, a magnificent sunset, and the night is coming. The golden age under King Shulgi feels unassailable. The bureaucracy is a well-oiled machine. The temples gleam, and Sumerian culture is the envy of the known world. But as Shulgi's long reign nears its end, and his less capable sons take the throne, the old anxieties begin to resurface. The prosperity of the Renaissance was a powerful anesthetic, but the underlying disease was never cured. The whispers from the West, the stories of the Amorites, become more frequent and more alarming. And so, the kings of Uar turn to the most primal, most instinctual form of defense known to civilization. They decide to build a wall. Not just any wall, a super wall. You are transported to the northern frontier of the empire, a desolate, windswept plain somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, under the brutal sun, a project of almost unimaginable scale is underway. Tens of thousands of laborers are toiling in the dust. They are digging a wide, deep foundation trench that stretches from horizon to horizon. They are molding and firing millions upon millions of mud bricks in temporary kilns that spew black smoke into the pale sky. This is to be the Murik Tidnum, the wall that keeps the Tidnum away. Tidnum is the Sumerian name for the Amorites, the nomadic peoples of the western desert. The scale of the project is a testament to both Sumerian engineering and their growing desperation. The wall is planned to be over 170 miles long, a colossal barrier of brick and earth designed to seal off the core of the empire from the barbarians they so feared. It is a massive, state-sponsored act of denial, a physical manifestation of their desire to keep the outside world at bay. You watch the endless lines of workers, their backs brown and slick with sweat, passing baskets of earth and stacks of bricks. The logistics are staggering. Scribes with their clay tablets are everywhere, meticulously recording work assignments and the distribution of rations, the familiar payment of barley, oil, and beer that fuels all great Sumerian endeavors. A mainstream historical fact is that this wall was a very real project undertaken by King Shusin, one of Shulgi's successors. We have inscriptions that boast about its construction, presenting it as a great feat of royal power that guarantees the safety and tranquility of Sumer. It was their Hadrian's Wall, their Great Wall of China, and like many such walls throughout history, it was a symbol of a deeper problem. Empires at the peak of their confidence expand. Empires that are growing fearful and defensive build walls. The construction site is a microcosm of the empire. You see teams of conscripted laborers from every city, from Eridu in the south to Nippur in the north, all working under the direction of military overseers from UR. There's a grim efficiency to it all, but you can also sense the strain. This project is draining immense resources. The manpower, the food, the sheer organizational effort required. It's all being diverted from other essential tasks. Perhaps a vital canal near Lagash is silting up because the laborers who should be clearing it are here, building this wall. Perhaps the royal granaries are being depleted faster than they can be refilled to feed this temporary army of builders. Here's a quirky tidbit. Despite the wall's impressive name and the royal propaganda, its actual effectiveness is highly debatable. For one, it's not made of stone. It's a mud brick wall in a region that, while arid, still experiences occasional heavy rains. It requires constant maintenance to prevent it from eroding and crumbling. More importantly, a 170-mile wall in the middle of a vast plain is incredibly difficult to garrison effectively. The Amorites were not a conventional army that would march up to the wall and lay siege. They were small, mobile bands. They could simply go around the ends of the wall or find a poorly guarded section to breach. Historians still argue whether the wall was ever even truly completed, or if it was more of a series of fortified checkpoints connected by a lower, less substantial barrier. Was it a genuine military strategy? Or was it primarily a piece of political theater? A way for a nervous king to look like he was taking decisive action against a threat that he couldn't actually fight effectively. It's like putting a new, expensive lock on your front door when you know the real problem is that the foundation of your house is cracking. It makes you feel safer for a little while, but it doesn't solve the underlying issue. You can see the futility in the faces of some of the workers. They are farmers, not soldiers. They know the land. They know that a wall can't stop the wind, it can't make the rain fall, and it can't command the rivers. As they build this monument to fear, they can feel the earth under their feet growing harder, drier. The dust that coats their skin is the same dust that is beginning to settle over their fields back home. The Amorites are a visible threat, a convenient scapegoat for a deeper, more terrifying problem that has no face and cannot be stopped by a barrier of brick. The wall is a line in the sand, drawn by a civilization that feels the tide of fate turning against it. They pour their remaining wealth and energy into this grand, desperate gesture, hoping it will be enough. But the real enemy isn't on the other side of the wall. The real enemy is already inside the gates, and it's falling from the sky and rising from the earth. The Great Wall, whether a real barrier or a psychological placebo, does little to stop the fundamental forces at play. You now feel a palpable shift, not in the political landscape, but in the very air you breathe. The sky, which was once a brilliant, clear blue over UR, now seems to have a persistent, hazy, grayish-yellow tint. The sun shines with a brassy, weak light, its heat less a direct blast, and more a suffocating, oppressive warmth. The sky has turned to dust. You are witnessing the onset of a catastrophic, multi-decade megadrought. This isn't a single bad year or a temporary dry spell. This is a profound, long-term climatic shift that is gripping the entire Near East. You travel north, away from the Sumerian heartland, to the headwaters of the great Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the mountains of Anatolia. Here, where the lifeblood of Sumer begins, the change is stark. The snowpack on the mountains, which normally melts in a predictable spring surge to flood the plains, is thin and patchy. The streams that feed the great rivers are shrunken, some reduced to mere trickles. A mainstream historical fact, confirmed by paleoclimatology, is that a severe aridification event, often called the 4.2 kilo-year event, struck this region at precisely this time. Evidence from ice cores, lake sediments, and ancient pollen shows a dramatic drop in rainfall that lasted for generations. This wasn't a local problem. It was a hemispheric event that caused the collapse of civilizations from Egypt, the Old Kingdom, to the Indus Valley. Sumer was right in the crosshairs. Their entire civilization, built on the predictable rhythm of river floods, was uniquely vulnerable. You return to the plains of Sumer, and the consequences are devastatingly clear. The mighty Euphrates, the source of all life and prosperity, is sluggish and shallow. The intricate network of canals, the pride of Sumerian engineering, is now a system of veins for a dying body. Many of the smaller canals are completely dry, their bottoms cracked and dusty. The larger ones carry a fraction of their normal flow. You watch a group of farmers standing on the bank of a major canal, their faces etched with despair. They have their bronze-bladed hoes. They have their teams of oxen. They are ready to work. But the water level is too low to reach the intake for their irrigation ditch. Their fields, just beyond the bank, are parched and gray. The green reed beds that line the waterways are turning a sickly yellow-brown. The dust is everywhere. It's not just in the sky. It coats every surface. A fine, gritty powder settles on the food in the market, on the polished temple floors, on the clay tablets of the scribes. When the wind blows, it doesn't bring relief. It brings blinding dust storms that can last for days, reducing visibility to a few feet and burying everything in a layer of fine topsoil stripped from the desiccated fields to the north. These storms, which the Sumerians called the asug, become a terrifyingly common occurrence. They are seen as the evil wind, a demonic force sent by angry gods. You see the psychological toll this takes. The vibrant confidence of the golden age evaporates. The world has become hostile and unpredictable. The cosmic order, which the priests and the king were supposed to maintain, is clearly broken. People look to the ziggurat, to the home of their god Nana, with a growing sense of dread. The daily offerings continue. The rituals are performed with even more frantic precision, but the sky does not change. The evil wind keeps blowing. The priests sacrifice more sheep, recite more incantations, but the river keeps falling. Here's a quirky tidbit about their attempts to understand this. The Sumerians were meticulous observers of the heavens, but not for scientific reasons. They practiced astrology, believing that the movements of the planets and the appearance of the sky held omens about the future. A hazy ring around the moon, a strange color in the sunset, a planet that appeared unusually bright. All were messages from the gods. We have omen texts from this period, and they are filled with dire predictions. If the sky is dark like a scorched pot, the harvest will fail. If the wind brings dust from the west, the enemy will attack. Historians still argue how literally the kings and priests took these omens. Were they a genuine guide for policy, or a way to retroactively explain disasters in a religious framework? Either way, you can imagine the terror of living in a world where a dusty sky is not just a weather phenomenon, but a direct, angry message from a god who holds your life in his hands. The drought is the great engine of the coming collapse. It's the prime mover, the ultimate cause that sets all the other disasters in motion. It withers the crops, which will lead to famine. It weakens the central authority of the king in UR, who can no longer guarantee prosperity. And it puts immense pressure on the peoples living in the even more arid lands to the west and north, the Amorites. They aren't invading because they are inherently warlike or greedy. They are becoming climate refugees. They are moving toward the river valleys, the only places where there is any water left, driven by the same dusty sky that is now choking the life out of Sumer. The Great Wall was built to keep out an enemy, But the true enemy is one that no wall can stop. It's an enemy that is already here, silent, pervasive, and utterly indifferent to prayers or brickwork. It's the sky itself. The dusty sky and the shrinking rivers are just the beginning of the ecological nightmare. Now you witness a more insidious, more localized horror unfolding, a catastrophe of Sumer's own making. You walk out to the field surrounding the city of Girsu, once one of the most fertile districts in the entire empire. The stalks of barley are stunted and withered, their heads small and holding few grains. But it's the ground itself that draws your attention. In the bright, hazy sunlight, you see a white, crystalline crust covering vast patches of the soil, glittering like a dusting of snow. This is not snow. This is salt. The very earth is turning to poison. You are witnessing the horrifying endgame of salinization, a slow-motion disaster that has been building for centuries. To understand it, you have to understand the genius and the flaw of Sumerian agriculture. A mainstream historical fact is that the Sumerians were masters of irrigation. They dug a complex web of canals that diverted water from the Euphrates, allowing them to grow massive surpluses of food in a land with very little rainfall. This irrigation was the engine of their civilization, but it came with a hidden cost. The water of the Euphrates, like most river water, contained small amounts of dissolved mineral salts. In a normal climate with regular rainfall, these salts would be washed deep into the soil and flushed away. But in the intensely hot, dry climate of southern Mesopotamia, something different happens. The farmers flood their fields with river water. The sun then beats down, and a huge amount of that water evaporates, leaving the salt behind in the topsoil. Year after year, century after century, this process repeats. The concentration of salt in the soil builds up, slowly, imperceptibly at first. Remember all those meticulous clay tablets in the archives? They give us the smoking gun. Scribes recorded crop yields for centuries. In the early days of Sumer, around 3000 BC, the fields were planted with a mix of wheat and barley. But wheat is less tolerant of salt than barley. The records show that over time, farmers began planting less and less wheat and more barley, a clear adaptation to the declining quality of the soil. Now, in the midst of the great drought, this slow-burning problem has exploded into a full-blown crisis. The drought has two devastating effects. First, with less water flowing in the Euphrates, the concentration of salt in the river water itself increases. They are now irrigating with even salter water than before. Second, the high water table of the region, combined with the intense evaporation, acts like a wick, actively drawing up ancient, salty groundwater to the surface. The white crust you see is the physical evidence of this process. It's like the land is sweating salt. You watch a farmer and his son trying to work one of these afflicted fields. Their bronze-tipped plow, pulled by a skeletal-looking ox, struggles to break through the hard, saline crust. Where they do manage to turn the soil, it is pale and lifeless. They know this field is dying. The yield this year will be a fraction of what their grandfathers harvested from this same plot of land. There's a deep, tragic irony here. The very technique that created their prosperity, the irrigation that built the ziggurats and funded the armies, has ultimately poisoned their land. They are being ruined by their own success. It's a terrifying ecological feedback loop. Here's a quirky and rather sad tidbit. The Sumerians had a goddess of farming, Azina, and they had detailed agricultural almanacs. One such text, the Farmer's Almanac, is written as a father's advice to his son on how to manage a field for a whole year. It's incredibly detailed, covering everything from when to plow to how many times to water. But it also contains lines like, "Do not let the water rise too high over the field." This suggests they had some empirical understanding that overwatering was bad, but they likely didn't grasp the chemical process behind it. Historians still argue whether they fully understood the link between irrigation and salinization. Did they see the salt as a supernatural curse, a punishment from the gods for some unknown transgression? Or did they have a practical, if incomplete, understanding of the environmental degradation they were causing, The social consequences are profound. Land that was once prime real estate, capable of supporting a family for generations, becomes worthless. Farmers are forced to abandon their ancestral fields, the very fields where their relatives were buried under the courtyard floor, remember? This disconnects them from their land, their history, and their spiritual anchors. They become landless refugees in their own country, drifting toward the cities in search of work or rations, creating a new, impoverished urban underclass. The ecological trap has sprung. The megadrought from the sky makes the salt from the earth worse. The combination is lethal. The agricultural surplus that was the foundation of the entire Sumerian state structure, the bureaucracy, the priests, the craftsmen, the army, is vanishing. The king in UR can pass laws. The priests can say prayers. The scribes can keep meticulous records of the declining yields, but no one can make barley grow on salty earth. The horrifying truth is dawning on them. The land itself, their Mother Earth, is rejecting them. It's a slow, quiet, and inexorable kind of doom, one that unfolds not with the clash of swords, but with the silent, glittering spread of a white crust across the dying fields. The consequences of the dusty sky and the salty earth now cascade directly into the heart of the Sumerian city. The agricultural collapse is no longer a distant problem for farmers. It is a clear and present danger for every single person, from the highest priest to the humblest craftsman. You walk through the streets of UR, and the vibrant, confident city you saw earlier is gone. It has been replaced by a city gripped by the cold, gnawing fear of starvation. The granaries are empty. You head toward the massive temple complex, which, in addition to its religious functions, serves as the central bank and food reserve for the state. In the Golden Age, its cavernous storehouses were overflowing with barley, a symbol of the empire's wealth and stability. Now, the scene is one of quiet desperation. The huge, beehive-shaped silos, once filled to the brim, are now hollow, echoing chambers. You see temple officials, their faces grim, using wooden measuring rods to gauge the pitifully low levels of grain remaining. The surplus is gone. The state is running on fumes. The marketplace tells the same story. The cheerful chaos has been replaced by a tense, subdued atmosphere. There are fewer merchants, and the goods they have are meager and wildly expensive. A small basket of withered-looking dates that would have been cheap a few years ago is now being sold for a sliver of silver. The fundamental currency of the empire, barley, has become so scarce that the old system of exchange is breaking down. A mainstream historical fact from this period is the appearance of what are called famine texts. These are administrative records from UR that show the price of barley skyrocketing to 60 times its normal value. This wasn't just inflation, it was a total economic meltdown. The social fabric begins to tear. You see a baker in his shop, but his clay oven is cold. He has no flour to bake bread. He sits listlessly in his doorway, another skilled craftsman made useless by the crisis. The weaver's loom is still, the potter's wheel is idle. Without a food surplus, the state can no longer afford to pay these specialized workers their rations of beer and grain. The entire system of state-sponsored industry, which you saw thriving under King Shulgi, grinds to a halt. People are forced to abandon their crafts and focus on one thing only: finding their next meal. This economic ruin breeds social unrest. In a shaded alley, you witness a heated argument. A man accuses his neighbor of stealing a small sack of grain. The dispute, which might have been settled calmly by a temple judge in better times, now teeters on the edge of violence. People are hungry, desperate, and suspicious. The sophisticated laws of Namu, based on silver shekels and restitution, seem like a quaint memory from a different world. Now the law of the jungle is beginning to take over. And what of the state? The king and his bureaucracy are trapped. Their power was built on their ability to manage and redistribute the agricultural surplus. Now that the surplus is gone, their authority is crumbling. A quirky and sad tidbit. We have letters from this period, written on clay tablets, sent from officials in outlying towns to the king in UR. They are filled with increasingly desperate pleas. One official writes, "There is no barley. How are my people to live?" Another reports that his soldiers are deserting their posts because their families are starving. The king writes back, issuing commands to send grain, but the officials on the ground know the granaries are empty. The letters reveal a government that is losing control, a system breaking down in real time. The scribes are still there, diligently recording the disaster, but their tablets have become letters from a sinking ship. Historians still argue about the extent of the cannibalism that may have occurred during this time. The later Lament for UR poem, which we will explore, speaks in harrowing, metaphorical terms of bodies littering the streets and people gnawing on leather straps. While direct archaeological evidence for cannibalism is scarce and controversial, the sheer desperation of the famine makes it a horrifying possibility. At the very least, society was breaking down to its most elemental level. The famine creates a vicious cycle. Hungry people are weak people. They are more susceptible to disease. They are less able to perform the hard labor needed to maintain the irrigation canals, which further reduces the potential for a good harvest, even if the rains were to return. A hungry army cannot fight effectively. The state is being hollowed out from the inside. The king in his palace in UR can issue all the decrees he wants, but he cannot command the loyalty of a starving soldier or the productivity of a famished farmer. The city of UR, once a beacon of order and prosperity, is becoming a trap. Its massive walls, designed to keep enemies out, now serve to keep the hungry populace in. The once bustling streets are now filled with listless, despairing people. The joyous sounds of the market have been replaced by the cries of hungry children. The horrifying truth of Sumer's collapse is that it wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow, grinding process of starvation and economic disintegration. The empire wasn't being conquered. It was simply ceasing to function. And on the other side of the useless wall, the climate refugees, the Amorites, are watching. They see a great, magnificent fruit that is rotting from the inside out, ready to fall from the tree. The Great Wall of Shusin stands as a monument to a dying strategy. The Sumerians saw the threat as a simple one: civilized people on the inside, barbarian hordes on the outside. But the megadrought has erased that simplistic line. The people they are trying to keep out are not just invaders. They are a mirror image of their own suffering. You are now on the other side of the wall, out in the parched western steppe, moving with a clan of Amorites. The word Amorite conjures up the image the Sumerian scribes wanted to create: a savage, destructive nomad. But what you see is not a ravening horde. You see families. You see men, women, and children, their faces weathered by the sun and wind, their bodies lean from persistent hunger. They move with their skinny flocks of sheep and goats, constantly searching for the next patch of brown, withered pasture or the next muddy, brackish waterhole. Their traditional way of life, a semi-nomadic pastoralism that had been sustainable for centuries, has been shattered by the same climate catastrophe that is strangling Sumer. Their oral traditions, passed down around smoky campfires, speak of a time when the rains were plentiful and the grasslands stretched to the horizon. Now the land is a patchwork of dust and rock. The herds are shrinking, and the old migration routes are no longer viable. They are not moving toward Sumer out of greed or a desire for conquest. They are moving toward the faint, green-brown line on the eastern horizon that marks the Euphrates Valley, because it is their only hope for survival. They are climate refugees, pushed by the same invisible hand that is salting the Sumerian fields. A mainstream historical fact is that the Amorites were not a unified nation, but a collection of different tribes who shared a common West Semitic language and cultural background. For centuries, there had been a complex relationship between them and the Sumerians. Some Amorites had peacefully settled in Sumerian cities, taking Sumerian names and adopting their customs. Some served as mercenaries in Sumerian armies. This wasn't a simple us versus them situation. It was a messy, complicated frontier relationship that was now being torn apart by the environmental crisis. You watch as an Amorite scouting party returns to the main camp. They have been probing the defenses of the Sumerian frontier. They don't report on massive armies or strong fortifications. They report on weakness. They speak of guard towers on the Great Wall that are undermanned, of soldiers who look hungry and demoralized, of outlying farmsteads that have been completely abandoned. They see a land that is not strong and defiant, but hollow and vulnerable. The great empire of Uar, which once projected an aura of invincible power, now looks like a sick animal, ready to be taken down. Here's a quirky tidbit that reveals the deep cultural chasm between the two peoples, at least from the Sumerian perspective. One Sumerian text describes the archetypal Amorite as a man who digs up truffles on the steppe, who does not know how to bend the knee in obeisance, who eats raw meat, who has no house during his lifetime, and who is not buried when he dies. This is pure cultural snobbery. The Amorites didn't have houses because they were mobile pastoralists. They ate raw or lightly cooked meat because fuel was scarce, and their burial customs were simply different. But to the city-dwelling, grain-eating, God-fearing Sumerian, this was the definition of savagery. It was a failure of imagination, an inability to see the Amorites as anything other than a negation of their own values. This perception is what made the next phase of the collapse so tragic. The starving Sumerians inside their cities saw the hungry Amorites outside as the cause of their problems, not as fellow victims of a larger crisis. Historians still argue about the nature of the Amorite invasion. Was it a coordinated military campaign, or more of a slow, creeping migration, a steady infiltration of desperate people? It was likely a combination of both. Some Amorite chieftains were certainly ambitious warlords who saw a chance to carve out kingdoms for themselves from the decaying corpse of the UR3 empire. But many of their followers were simply desperate families looking for water and food. You witness a small, brutal skirmish near a fortified settlement. A band of Amorites, armed with simple bows and bronze-tipped spears, attacks a small Sumerian town. The goal isn't to capture the town and occupy it. The goal is the town's grain silo. The fighting is desperate and ugly on both sides. The Sumerian defenders are fighting for their homes and their last reserves of food. The Amorite attackers are fighting for their next meal. There is no glory here, no clash of civilizations. There is only the grim calculus of starvation. The Great Wall becomes increasingly irrelevant. The Amorites simply flow around it. They find gaps, or they overwhelm small, isolated garrisons. They begin to occupy the abandoned farmlands, settling along the vital watercourses. They are not destroying the irrigation system. They are seizing it. For the kings in Uar, this is the ultimate nightmare. The barbarians are not just at the gates. They are settling in the backyard, taking control of the very infrastructure that the empire needs to survive. The wall, the ultimate symbol of separation, has failed. The world has refused to stay neatly divided. The crisis has blurred the lines, turning farmer against nomad, city against steppe, in a desperate, chaotic struggle for the last drops of water in a dying land. The pressure from the Amorite migrations and the internal rot of famine and ecological collapse creates the perfect conditions for the empire to tear itself apart. The magnificent, centralized state created by Uarnamu and Shulgi was a marvel of efficiency in good times. In bad times, its rigidity becomes a fatal flaw. You are now a witness to the final political disintegration of the Sumerian world. A kingdom turns against itself. You are in the city of Isen, a major provincial capital to the north of Uar. The governor, a man named Ishbaera, is a canny and ambitious official. He is supposed to be a loyal servant of the king in Uar, Ibisen. But loyalty is a luxury that is fast disappearing. Ishbaera has his own troops, his own scribes, and his own granaries, though they are nearly as empty as everyone else's. He receives a stream of frantic messages from the king in Uar, demanding shipments of grain to feed the capital and troops to fight the twin threats of the Amorites and another enemy, rising in the east, the Elamites. Ishbaera looks at his own dwindling resources. He looks at his own hungry population. He sees the Amorite bands growing bolder, effectively cutting off the roads between his city and the capital. To send his grain and soldiers south to Ur would be to condemn his own city to starvation and leave it defenseless. It would be an act of suicide. So he makes a fateful decision. He begins to act not as a governor, but as a king. A mainstream historical fact is that Ishbi-Era, an official originally from Mari, and not even a native Sumerian, is the man who effectively breaks the empire. He writes a letter to his king, Ibbi-Sin, a masterpiece of insubordination disguised as loyal concern. He reports that the price of grain is impossibly high, that he needs a huge sum of silver to purchase any, and that he cannot safely transport it to Ur because of the Amorites. He then requests that the king put him in charge of the defense of Isin and the neighboring holy city of Nippur. It's a classic power play. By claiming he is protecting the sacred heart of Sumer, he is seizing control of it. You watch this process unfold. Ishbi-Era uses his local forces to secure his own territory. He begins to negotiate directly with the Amorite bands, sometimes fighting them, sometimes hiring them as mercenaries, sometimes granting them land to settle. He is a pragmatist. He is building his own power base, while the central government in Ur becomes increasingly isolated and irrelevant. The king Ibbi-Sin is now king in name only. He is effectively the mayor of a starving city-state, cut off from the lands he supposedly rules. This betrayal by Isin is the signal for a general collapse. Other city-states, seeing that the center can no longer protect them or provide for them, follow suit. The governor of Larsa declares his independence. The ruler of Eshnunna breaks away. The unified empire of the third dynasty of Ur fractures back into the mosaic of competing city-states that it had been for centuries before. The great Sumerian Renaissance is officially over. The old, petty rivalries, which had been suppressed for a century by the power of Ur, now flare up with a vengeance. Here's a quirky and tragic tidbit that illustrates the chaos. We have records of merchants trying to conduct business during this period. A trader might have a contract to deliver a boatload of copper to Ur, but to get there, he has to pass through the territory of Isin, then Larsa, each of which now considers itself an independent kingdom. Each new king demands a toll, a tax, or simply confiscates the goods for his own use. Commerce, the lifeblood of the empire, becomes impossible. The meticulously organized world of the Ur3 state dissolves into a landscape of competing warlords and roadblocks. It's like a modern federal highway system suddenly breaking up into a dozen private toll roads, each run by a different mob boss. Historians still argue about Ishbi-Era's motivations. Was he a cynical opportunist who saw the crisis as a chance to seize power? Or was he a responsible administrator who made the only logical choice available to him, prioritizing the survival of his own people over a sentimental and now meaningless loyalty to a failed state? The truth is likely a mixture of both. He was a product of his time, a time when the old rules no longer applied and survival was the only virtue. The consequences of this political fragmentation are catastrophic. There can be no coordinated defense against the Amorites. There can be no unified effort to repair the failing irrigation systems. Instead, the newly independent city-states begin to fight each other over the most precious resource of all, water. A city upstream, like Isin, can dam a canal or divert its flow, starving a city downstream, like Larsa. We have evidence of water wars breaking out, with cities sending out armed bands not to conquer land, but to break a rival's dams. The kingdom is not just fighting external enemies anymore. It is consuming itself. The Sumerians, the people who invented civilization as a way to cooperate and overcome the harshness of their environment, have now descended into a desperate, internecine struggle for the last dregs of a dying world. The once mighty empire of Ur is now just a collection of starving cities, each looking out for itself, each suspicious of its neighbors. This internal division is the final, fatal weakness. It leaves the heartland of Sumer, and the great city of Ur itself, exposed and vulnerable to the final, decisive blow. The empire is shattered. The Amorites have infiltrated the north, and the Sumerian cities are busy squabbling over the last scraps of food and water. The great city of Ur, the symbolic and spiritual heart of Sumer, is isolated and weak. King Ibisin is a king without a kingdom. And now, from the east, an old enemy smells blood in the water. This is the moment of the Elamite betrayal. You are transported across the vast, marshy plains to the land of Elam, in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains, in what is now modern-day Iran. The capital, Susa, is a powerful city in its own right, the center of a civilization that has been both a rival and a trading partner to Sumer for centuries. The Elamites have watched the slow-motion collapse of the Ur-3 dynasty with keen interest. They have felt the effects of the drought too, but their position in the better-watered mountain foothills has given them a resilience that the Sumerians on the salt-poisoned plains have lost. The king of Elam, Kendatu, is a shrewd and ruthless leader. He sees a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. The mighty empire of Ur, which had once treated Elam as a vassal state, demanding tribute and obedience, is now on its knees. For years, Elam had been forced to pay taxes to Ur. Now, the tables are about to turn, but Kendata knows that a direct assault on the Sumerian heartland would be costly. He needs an ally, someone on the inside. And so, he makes a pact with the devil. Or rather, a pact with a neighboring group that the Sumerians considered just as bad. The Elamites form an alliance with the people of Shamashki, a kingdom neighboring Elam, and other tribal groups from the mountains. This is a coalition of the hungry and the opportunistic, a force united by a shared desire to plunder the decaying wealth of Sumer. This alliance is the final piece of the puzzle, the force that will deliver the coup de grace. A mainstream historical fact is that this alliance between the Elamites and other groups was the specific force that ultimately destroyed Ur. The administrative texts from the final years of Ibisin's reign are filled with panicked references to the men of Elam, massing on the eastern frontier. The threat is no longer a creeping migration of refugees, but a focused, organized military invasion with a clear objective: the sacking of Sumer's greatest cities. The betrayal runs deeper than just a military alliance. Ishbi-Era, the rebellious governor-turned-king of Isin, plays a complicated and treacherous role. He is busy consolidating his own power in the north. While the Elamites prepare their invasion from the east, Ishbi-Era is fighting the Amorites, but also striking deals with them. He is positioning himself to be the master of whatever remains of Sumer after the storm passes. He does nothing to help Ur. In fact, by tying up potential allies and resources in his own northern kingdom, he ensures that Ur will face the Elamite onslaught alone. Here's a quirky and telling tidbit about the Elamite relationship with Sumer. For all their rivalry, the Elamites had deeply absorbed Sumerian culture. Their scribes wrote in cuneiform. They worshiped some of the same gods, and their art shows heavy Mesopotamian influence. The men leading the invasion of Ur were not strangers to Sumerian civilization. They were intimately familiar with it. They knew its strengths, and now, they knew its fatal weaknesses. This makes the invasion feel less like a barbarian raid and more like a hostile corporate takeover, executed with brutal, inside knowledge. The Elamites aren't coming to wipe out Sumerian culture, but to seize its assets. Historians still argue about the precise details of the deal between the Elamites and Ishbi-Era. Did they have a formal non-aggression pact? Did Ishbi-Era tacitly agree to let the Elamites sack Ur in exchange for them leaving his new kingdom of Isin alone? The clay tablets are silent on such secret diplomacy, but the circumstantial evidence is damning. Ishbi-Era, the man who was supposed to be the defender of Sumer, stood by and did nothing as the heart of his former nation was about to be cut out. He was playing the long game, waiting to pick up the pieces. The news of the Elamite alliance sends a fresh wave of terror through the streets of Ur. The Amorites were a persistent, chronic threat. The Elamites are an acute, existential one. They are not desperate nomads. They are a disciplined army. They have siege tactics. They have a unified command. They are coming not just for grain, but for gold, for glory, and for revenge for past humiliations. King Ibbi-Sin is trapped. His letters to Ishbaera become more and more desperate, begging for aid that he must know will never come. He tries to rally the citizens of Uar for a final defense. The city walls, which had seemed so useless against the slow tide of climate change and famine, now become their only hope. They are no longer a symbol of dominance, but a shell to hide inside, a last refuge against a world that has turned completely against them. The Elamite betrayal has sealed their fate. The stage is set for the final act of the tragedy, the siege of the greatest city in the world. The Elamite army, a disciplined and merciless force, swarms across the plains and arrives at the gates of Uar. The city, once the proud heart of an empire, is now an island of defiance in a sea of enemies. The great bronze-banded gates are shut. The sentries take their positions on the massive walls. The siege begins, and you are trapped inside. The first few days are filled with a grim, determined energy. King Ibbi-Sin, whatever his failings as a diplomat, tries to rally his people. Soldiers, many of them little more than boys or old men, patrol the ramparts, their bronze spears and leather shields a pathetic shadow of the armies of the Golden Age. The citizens are organized into war gangs, reinforcing weak points in the walls, hauling stones to the parapets to be used as projectiles. There is a sense of common purpose born of shared terror. But the Elamites are patient. They do not launch a full-scale assault against the formidable walls. They don't need to. They know the city's real enemy is already inside, starvation. They set up a fortified camp just out of bowshot and settle in to wait. Their strategy is simple and brutal. They will choke Uar to death. They systematically burn the withered fields around the city, ensuring that not a single grain can be smuggled in. They blockade the canals, cutting off the city's last link to the outside world. The siege is a tourniquet, tightening around the neck of Uar. Days turn into weeks. The initial defiance inside the walls begins to curdle into despair. The last of the grain reserves in the temple granaries are distributed, a meager daily ration that does little to quell the gnawing hunger. You walk through the streets, and the city is hauntingly quiet. The vibrant sounds of life and commerce have been replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the wails of the sick and the weak. People move slowly, conserving their energy. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes hollow. A mainstream historical fact drawn from the later laments about the city's fall is the complete breakdown of social order. The texts describe a city where, in the streets and roadways, bodies lay. The bonds of family and community dissolve under the unbearable pressure of famine. Neighbor turns against neighbor. The weak are preyed upon by the strong. The law code of Uar-Nammu is a forgotten relic. The only law is survival. You see this breakdown firsthand. A woman guards a small, smoky fire in her courtyard, boiling the leather from an old pair of sandals to try and create some semblance of broth. A group of men, their faces like skulls, huddle in an alley, their eyes furtively scanning for anyone who might have a hidden scrap of food. The stories of cannibalism, once a distant horror, now feel terrifyingly plausible. What would you not do to feed a starving child? What lines would you not cross? Here's a quirky and heartbreaking tidbit about their religious devotion in these final days. Even as they starved, the priests continued to perform the daily rituals for the moon god Nana. They would go through the motions of offering non-existent food and drink to the divine statue, their prayers becoming more and more frantic, more desperate. They believed that if they could just appease their angry god, he might yet save them. It is a scene of profound, tragic faith. They are literally starving to death while pretending to feed a god, hoping for a miracle that will not come. Historians still argue about the duration of the siege. It was likely several months, a slow, agonizing descent into hell. From the top of the ziggurat, the priests could look out over the walls and see the Elamite campfires burning brightly in the night, a constant, mocking reminder of their imprisonment. They could see the Amorite bands roaming freely across the plains, picking over the carcass of the dying kingdom. They were utterly, completely alone. The psychological toll is as devastating as the physical one. The people of Ur believed they were the center of the universe, the chosen people of the gods. How could this be happening? Their entire worldview, their understanding of the cosmos, is shattered. The gods have not just abandoned them, they have actively turned against them. The evil wind, the salty earth, the enemy at the gates, it's all part of a single, overwhelming divine judgment. They are being punished, and they don't even know what their crime was. The city begins to consume itself. People start tearing the wooden beams from abandoned houses for firewood. The beautiful gardens of the wealthy are stripped bare. The sacred groves around the temples are cut down. The city is literally eating its own infrastructure to survive another day. The great walls, once a symbol of pride, are now the baked clay walls of a giant tomb. The air is thick with the smell of disease and death. There is no hope left. There is only the waiting for the food to run out completely, the waiting for the inevitable moment when the Elamites decide that the city is weak enough for the final assault, the waiting for the end of the world. The end comes not with a thunderous crash, but with a weary, defeated groan. The siege has done its work. The defenders on the walls of Ur are too weak from hunger and disease to offer any meaningful resistance. The Elamite commanders, seeing the city spirit is broken, finally give the order to attack. You are there for the fall of mighty Ur, the day the world ends. The assault begins at dawn. The Elamite army, well-fed and organized, advances on the walls. They are not met with a hail of arrows and stones, but with a sporadic, feeble response. They bring up massive wooden battering rams, and the rhythmic, sickening thud of wood against the brickwork of the main gate echoes through the starving city. For the people inside, it is the sound of doom's knock. Other soldiers use crude ladders to scale the walls at less defended points, easily overpowering the skeletal sentries who try to stop them. The main gate splinters and breaks. The Elamite soldiers pour into the city, a flood of violence and vengeance. What follows is not a battle, it is a slaughter. The invaders sweep through the streets, cutting down anyone they find, soldier and civilian alike. The cries of the attackers mingle with the screams of the dying. The city, which had fallen into a deathly quiet, is now filled with the terrible sounds of its own destruction. You take shelter in a small, abandoned house, peering through a crack in the mud brick wall. You see a squad of Elamite soldiers, their faces grimly triumphant, dragging a family from their home. The pleas for mercy are ignored. The wealth of the household, a few pieces of pottery, some woven mats, is kicked aside. The soldiers are not here for petty loot. They are here to break the city, to humiliate it, to erase it. A mainstream historical fact, corroborated by both archaeological evidence and the later lament texts, is the systematic and brutal sacking of the city. The invaders showed no mercy. They looted the palaces of the wealthy and the humble homes of the poor. But their main target was the sacred heart of the city, the temple complex of the god Nana. You watch in horror as the Elamite soldiers storm the holy precinct. They smash down the gilded doors of the god's inner sanctum, the place of ultimate holiness. They rush into the sacred chambers, the places where only the highest priests were allowed to tread. They are not driven by religious fervor. They have no respect for the gods of Sumer. They are driven by greed. They strip the god statue of its gold plating, its lapis lazuli eyes, its precious ornaments. They topple the statue from its pedestal, a profound act of sacrilege that, to any Sumerian watching, would be more devastating than death itself. It is the physical manifestation of their god being slain and defiled. And then comes the ultimate humiliation. The Elamite soldiers find the king, Ibisin. They do not kill him. Death would be too kind. They bind him in chains, the last king of the glorious third dynasty of Ur, and they drag him through the streets of his own burning city. He is taken as a captive, destined to be paraded through the streets of Susa in Elam, a living trophy of their victory. The divine kingship of Sumer, a tradition stretching back for a millennium, ends here, in dust and disgrace. Here's a quirky and particularly dark tidbit from the archaeological record. In the ruins of Uar, archaeologists found layers of ash and destruction that correspond to this event. But they also found evidence of something else, willful desecration. They found valuable objects, like finely carved stone vases, that were not stolen but deliberately smashed to pieces. This wasn't just looting. It was a conscious effort to destroy the very symbols of Sumerian culture and power. It was an act of pure, spiteful vandalism on a citywide scale. Historians still argue about the ultimate fate of the city's population. How many were killed in the initial assault? How many were taken away into slavery in Elam? How many managed to escape into the marshes and plains? The texts speak of a general massacre, but it's likely that thousands of the survivors, particularly skilled craftsmen, were rounded up and deported. They were more valuable as slaves than as corpses. As the sun sets on the fallen city, a new horror begins. The Elamites set fires. The dry, wooden beams of the houses, the reed roofing, the stored oils, everything becomes fuel. Flames leap into the twilight sky, consuming the magnificent city. The mud brick walls, baked hard by the sun for centuries, now glow red and begin to crumble in the intense heat. The great ziggurat, the stairway to heaven, is silhouetted against a curtain of fire and smoke. It stands for a time, a defiant shadow, before parts of its facing begin to shear off and crash to the ground. The city of Uar, the jewel of Sumer, the center of the civilized world, is dead. It is a smoking, corpse-strewn ruin. The horrifying truth of its fall is that it was not a single event, but the culmination of a long, agonizing process. The climate changed, the earth turned to salt, the government fractured, and the enemies closed in. The final sack was just the moment the last breath left the body. The silence that now descends upon the ruins is absolute, a silence that will last for millennia. The fires of Uar have died down, leaving behind a blackened, skeletal ruin under a sky still hazy with smoke. The Elamite looters have moved on, taking their plunder and their captives with them. The silence that settles over the city is profound, broken only by the mournful cry of the wind whistling through shattered doorways. It is in this silence that the true voice of the disaster is finally heard. You are now listening to the words of a survivor, or at least a contemporary who felt the full weight of the loss, as they compose one of the most powerful and heartbreaking works of ancient literature, the Lament for Uar. This isn't a dry historical chronicle. It's a poem, a raw outpouring of grief, shock, and theological despair. It's the closest thing we have to an eyewitness account of the emotional and psychological impact of the fall. As you sit among the ruins, the words of the lament, written on a clay tablet by some unknown, heartbroken scribe, materialize in the air around you. The poem begins with the gods. It describes how the great council of the gods, led by the fickle Enlil, made a terrible decision. For reasons that are never fully explained, they decided to abandon Sumer. A mainstream historical fact is that these city laments were a specific literary genre in Mesopotamia, a way to process national trauma. The Lament for Uar is the most famous and complete example. It is a therapy session for a collapsed civilization. The first step is to accept the terrible truth. An and Enlil have changed their word. Their command cannot be overturned. The gods themselves ordained this destruction. The poet then gives voice to the city's patron goddess, Ningal, the wife of the moon god Nana. She is depicted as a weeping mother, pleading desperately with the higher gods to spare her city. On that day, I did not desert my city, she cries. I, the queen, my city has been destroyed before my eyes. She describes how she wept, how she clutched her thighs in anguish, how she begged Enlil, let not my city be destroyed. Let not Uar be destroyed. But her pleas are ignored. This is a powerful theological statement. It's not that their local gods were weak. It's that they too were victims of a higher, inscrutable divine decree. This absolves Nana and Ningal of blame and places it squarely on the shoulders of the great gods of the pantheon. The lament then shifts to a graphic, street-level view of the destruction you just witnessed. The poet's words paint a devastating picture. In its streets, where the feasting crowds would stroll, scattered bodies lay. In its places where the rites of the land were performed, the ground was soaked with blood. The imagery is stark and brutal. The dead, like fat on the water, were floating in the river. The poem inventories the losses, not just of people, but of the very fabric of civilization. The storehouses have been set on fire. The precious metal, stones, and lapis lazuli are scattered. Here's a quirky and incredibly poignant detail from the text. The poet doesn't just mourn the loss of people and wealth. They mourn the loss of normalcy, the small sounds of a living city. The sound of the churning vat and the mixing bowl has ceased in the house. No sheep are penned. Their fat is not rendered. The song has been silenced. It's the absence of these everyday sounds and activities that truly signifies the death of the city. It's a detail that makes the vast, historical catastrophe feel deeply personal and intimate. The lament is a storm of questions. Why did this happen? Who is to blame? Historians still argue about the poem's primary purpose. Was it a genuine expression of religious despair? Or was it a sophisticated piece of political propaganda? After the fall of Ishbi-Era, the treacherous governor of Isin, eventually consolidates his power and establishes a new dynasty. Some scholars suggest that the lament, by blaming the gods for the disaster, effectively absolved any human leaders, like Ishbi-Era, of responsibility. It reframed the fall of not as a political and military failure, but as an unavoidable act of God, a divine cosmic reset. In this reading, the poem becomes a tool to legitimize the new regime rising from Ur's ashes. As you listen to the lament's final verses, the tone shifts from raw grief to a plea for restoration. The poem calls for the gods to return, for the city to be rebuilt, for the black-headed people, the Sumerians, to be gathered once more. O Nana, may your city be restored for you. It's a flicker of hope in the overwhelming darkness, a refusal to accept that this is the final end. The poem itself becomes an act of defiance, a way of ensuring that is not forgotten, that its story is told. The words of the lament fade, and you are left once more in the silent ruins. The poem has given a voice to the rubble. It has transformed a pile of shattered brick and bone into a narrative of loss, betrayal, and a desperate, clinging hope. The horrifying truth of the fall of isn't just in the historical facts of drought and invasion. It's in the emotional reality captured in these ancient verses. It's the sound of a civilization weeping for itself, trying to make sense of a world that has been turned to ash. The lament is the city's ghost, and its mournful song will echo through the corridors of history for thousands of years. The words of the lament fade, leaving an imprint on the desolate landscape. The immediate trauma of the sack of is over, but the consequences continue to ripple outwards. You now begin a journey through a dead land, a tour of the ghost towns and decaying infrastructure of what was once the vibrant heartland of Sumer. The ruin of was not an isolated event. It was the final, fatal blow to an entire urban ecosystem. You leave the shattered gates of behind and travel north, following what used to be a major canal. It's now little more than a dry, dusty ditch, its banks crumbling and overgrown with desiccated weeds. The once mighty waterway that carried barges laden with grain and copper is now a scar on the landscape, a testament to a forgotten order. The air is still and silent. There are no farmers in the fields, because the fields are no longer fields. They are barren expanses of cracked, salt-encrusted earth that crunch under your feet. The brilliant white of the salt is dazzling and horrifying in the relentless sun. Your first stop is the city of Eridu, just a short distance from According to Sumerian myth, this was the very first city in the world, the place where kingship first descended from heaven. It was their equivalent of the Garden of Eden, a place of immense religious and historical significance. Now it is a ghost town. You walk through its gates, which hang crookedly on their bronze pivots. The houses are empty. their mud brick walls slowly melting back into the earth from which they came. A potsherd, painted with a geometric design, crunches under your foot, the last remnant of a family dinner from a forgotten age. A mainstream historical fact is that the abandonment of these southern cities was a long-term process, accelerated to a terminal point by the collapse of UR. The environmental degradation, particularly the salinization of the soil, had been making agriculture in the far south increasingly difficult for centuries. The fall of the central government was simply the final straw. With no state to maintain the large-scale irrigation networks, the system completely failed, rendering the land uninhabitable. You wander into the ruins of Eridu's temple, dedicated to the wise god Enki. The structure is dilapidated, its walls streaked with the ghostly white of salt drawn up from the damp foundations. The offering tables are bare, coated in a thick layer of dust. The silence in this holy place is absolute. It is a powerful symbol. The god of fresh water has been defeated in his own house by an enemy of salt and dust. Continuing your journey, you pass through the ghostly remains of other great cities, Larsa, Uruk, Lagash. Each is a variation on the same theme of decay and abandonment. Uruk, the city of the legendary hero Gilgamesh, a metropolis that once boasted a population in the tens of thousands, is now a collection of silent, eroding mounds. The winds of the steppe have piled sand against the crumbling walls, slowly burying the evidence of this once great civilization. Here's a quirky and eerie tidbit. In some of these abandoned cities, archaeologists have found signs of squatter occupation. After the original inhabitants were killed, deported, or fled, small bands of people, perhaps impoverished Amorites or Sumerian refugees, moved into the ruins. They would build crude hearths in the corners of collapsed palaces and use broken pieces of royal monuments to shore up their simple shelters. It's a strange and poignant image, the last vestiges of humanity, living like mice in the skeleton of a dead giant. It's a stark illustration of how far the mighty had fallen. Historians still argue about the speed and totality of this abandonment. Was it a sudden, mass exodus following the fall of UR? Or a more gradual bleeding out over several decades, as families gave up and moved north, seeking more fertile land? The evidence suggests the latter. The collapse of the UR3 state created a power vacuum and a systems failure that made life in the south untenable. People left not because of a direct order, but because the land could no longer support them. It was a rational choice in the face of ecological ruin. Your journey through this ghost land reveals the horrifying truth about a system's collapse. A civilization is not just its people. It's the intricate network that connects them. It's the canals, the trade routes, the supply chains, the shared laws, and the common defense. When that network breaks, the cities, which are the nodes of the network, cannot survive on their own. They become isolated, starving islands in a hostile sea. The landscape itself becomes a character in the story. The mounds of the dead cities, known today as tells, are the graves of the Sumerian world. Each layer of the mound is a generation, a century of life, and the top layer is one of ash, salt, and abandonment. The very earth has become a monument to failure. The Sumerians had built a civilization that seemed to defy nature, to impose order on a chaotic world. But in the end, nature, aided by their own unwitting mistakes, had the final say. Walking through this silent, salt-choked landscape, you feel like an archaeologist of the apocalypse, sifting through the remains of a world that believed it was eternal, only to discover that it was built on a foundation of sand and salt. The cities are dead, silent mounds of dust and memory. But the people, at least some of them, survived. The physical infrastructure of Sumerian civilization has collapsed, but the human element, the software of their culture, is portable. You now follow the ragged streams of survivors as they flee the ruined south. The children of Sumer scatter, becoming refugees and carriers of a legacy. Their journeys are perilous. You follow a family as they make their way north from the outskirts of fallen UR. They travel light, carrying only what they can on their backs, a water skin, a small bag of parched grain salvaged from some forgotten corner, and perhaps a small clay figurine of a household god, a pathetic, portable remnant of their shattered faith. They are gaunt and weary, their once fine woolen garments now tattered rags. They are the lucky ones. They escaped the slaughter and were not chained and deported to Elam. But their future is deeply uncertain. They travel through a lawless land. The collapse of the central government means there are no patrols, no authorities to ensure safe passage. The roads are prowled by bandits and desperate people of all kinds. The family you follow moves cautiously, traveling at night when they can, hiding during the heat of the day. They are not just fleeing the ruins of their home. They are navigating a world that has reverted to a more primal state. A mainstream historical fact is that this period saw a major demographic shift in Mesopotamia. The population moved decisively northward, away from the salt-poisoned lands of the traditional Sumerian heartland. Cities in the north and central parts of Mesopotamia, like Kish, Babylon, and Ishnana, which were less affected by the salinization, began to grow in importance. This was the end of the South's dominance, a dominance that had lasted for over 1,000 years. The Sumerian refugees arrive, not as proud citizens of a great empire, but as impoverished immigrants. They arrive in cities now controlled by Amorite chieftains who have established their own dynasties. You watch as the family you've been following approaches the gates of Isin, the city of the treacherous Ishbaera. They are met with suspicion. They are frisked for weapons and questioned. They are outsiders, their southern dialect marking them as arrivals from the disaster zone. What can they offer? They have no land, no wealth. All they have is their knowledge. The father of the family might be a scribe, trained in the prestigious adubas of UR. He knows how to read and write cuneiform, how to calculate yields, how to draft a law code. The new Amorite king of Isin, though he may be a barbarian by Sumerian standards, is no fool. He knows he needs to manage his new kingdom. He needs administrators, tax collectors, record keepers. And the best-trained administrators in the world are the now jobless Sumerian scribes. Here's a quirky and fascinating tidbit about this cultural transmission. The new Amorite kings, in an effort to legitimize their rule, began to adopt all the trappings of Sumerian kingship. They took on Sumerian royal titles, sponsored the rebuilding of old Sumerian temples, and, most importantly, they commissioned the writing of Sumerian literature. In a strange twist of fate, some of the most important works of Sumerian culture, like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the City Laments, including the one for UR, were copied and preserved most extensively during this post-Sumerian period, under the patronage of foreign kings. It's as if they conquered the land, then hired the conquered to teach them how to be proper kings. Historians still argue about the fate of the Sumerian language itself. For centuries after the fall of UR, Sumerian continued to be used as a scholarly and religious language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. Scribes would learn in school, copying ancient texts as part of their training. But it was no longer a living, spoken language. The everyday tongue of Mesopotamia became Akkadian, a Semitic language related to the language of the Amorites. The Sumerian people did not vanish in a genetic sense. They simply integrated into the new, dominant culture, their language and distinct ethnic identity slowly fading over generations. You see this process happening in the streets of Isin and later, in the rising city of Babylon. The Sumerian refugee father gets a job in the new king's administration. His children grow up playing with Amorite and Akkadian children. They learn to speak their language fluently. They might still honor the old gods in their home, but in the public square, they adapt. They are survivors. Their grandchildren or great-grandchildren might think of themselves not as Sumerians, but as Babylonians. The scattering of Sumer's children is therefore not just a story of loss, but one of profound and lasting influence. As they fled their dying cities, they carried the seeds of their civilization with them, the principles of writing, law, administration, mathematics, and astronomy. They were the cultural DNA that was injected into the new civilizations that would rise in their place. The fall of UR was the end of Sumer as a political entity, but it was also the mechanism by which its culture became the foundational software for the entire future of Mesopotamia, and by extension the world. The people scattered, but their ideas had found a new home. The dust is settled. The ghost towns of the south are being slowly reclaimed by the desert. The Sumerian language is fading from the marketplaces, retreating into the halls of scholarship. The political entity of Sumer is gone forever. And yet, as you survey the Mesopotamian world a century or two after the fall of Ur, you see Sumer everywhere. The horrifying truth of the collapse gives way to a more complex legacy. The vanquished have, in a strange way, conquered their conquerors. You are now in the city of Babylon, a once minor town on the Euphrates that is rapidly becoming the new center of power under a dynasty of Amorite kings. The most famous of these kings, Hammurabi, is busy forging a new empire. He is a brilliant military strategist and a masterful administrator. And how does he run his new empire? He runs it on the Sumerian model. You walk into the workshop of a Babylonian scribe. He is teaching his students to write, not in a new script, but in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped system invented by the Sumerians thousands of years earlier. The texts they are copying for practice are not new Amorite epics, but the classics of Sumerian literature. They are meticulously transcribing the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Lament for Ur, and hymns to the old Sumerian gods. A mainstream historical fact is that the continuity of the cuneiform tradition for another 2,000 years after the fall of Sumer is one of the greatest examples of cultural inheritance in history. The tool was so powerful, so perfectly adapted to the clay tablet technology of the region, that it was adopted by wave after wave of new peoples: Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, even the Hittites and Persians. But the legacy goes far deeper than just the writing system. In the central courtyard of Babylon, you see a towering black stone monument, a stele erected by King Hammurabi. Carved on it is his famous law code. While more extensive, and in some ways harsher than the code of Ur-Nammu, its structure and principles are deeply Sumerian. It deals with contracts, property rights, family law, and irrigation disputes. It is a direct descendant of the legal tradition that began in Sumer. Hammurabi, the great Amorite king, presents himself not as a revolutionary, but as a righteous shepherd, a classic Sumerian royal trope, who is bringing justice to the land in the manner of his ancient predecessors. Even their understanding of the universe is built on a Sumerian foundation. You visit a Babylonian temple school where priests are studying the heavens. They are mapping the constellations, tracking the movements of the planets, and creating complex mathematical models to predict eclipses and other celestial events. The names they give the stars are often Babylonian, but the fundamental concepts, the division of the circle into 360 degrees, the base, 60 mathematical system that we still use for telling time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and the practice of observational astrology, are all direct inheritances from Sumer. A quirky tidbit: even our modern zodiac is a distant, Hellenized echo of the star patterns first identified and named by the priests of Sumer and Akkad. When someone asks for your sign, you are participating in a tradition born in the shadow of a ziggurat. The new gods of Babylon are also familiar. The chief god of Babylon, Marduk, rises to prominence. But as you read the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, you see that Marduk's story is woven from older threads. He battles a sea monster, Tiamat, which echoes earlier Sumerian myths. He is given the Tablet of Destinies, a concept straight out of Sumerian theology, making him the new Enlil, the new king of the gods. The Babylonian pantheon is essentially a rebranding of the Sumerian one, with the local hero, Marduk, edited into the lead role. The names change, but the cosmic structure remains the same. Historians still argue about how self-aware this process of cultural absorption was. Did kings like Hammurabi consciously and cynically adopt Sumerian forms to legitimize their rule over a mixed population? Or was the Sumerian way of doing things simply seen as the only right way to run a civilized state? It was probably a mix of both. Sumerian culture became the classical tradition of Mesopotamia. To be educated, to be civilized, To be a king meant to be fluent in the Sumerian legacy, even if you were ethnically an Amorite, a Kassite, or an Assyrian. The ultimate irony is that the knowledge of the vanquished became the power of the victors. The Amorites, once despised as uncultured nomads who did not know how to bend the knee, now sat in palaces, presiding over courts filled with scribes writing in the Sumerian style. They were managing their kingdoms, using Sumerian administrative techniques, and justifying their rule using Sumerian religious and legal ideas. The Sumerian people had been scattered and assimilated, their cities turned to dust. But their blueprint for civilization had not only survived, it had become the dominant operating system for the entire region for the next 2 millennia. The ghost of Sumer was sitting on the throne of Babylon. The vanquished had lost the battle for the land, but they had won the war for the soul of Mesopotamia. We have traveled a long and dusty road, from the glittering, confident streets of Ur in its golden age to the silent, salt-encrusted mounds that are its grave. We have seen a civilization rise to incredible heights of complexity and then crumble under a perfect storm of climate change, self-inflicted ecological disaster, and human desperation. Now, as our journey ends, we pull back, away from the ancient world, and find ourselves looking at our own reflection in the dust of Sumer. The horrifying truth of their collapse is not that it is ancient history, it's that it is a timeless, recurring pattern, and its echoes in our modern world are deeply, uncomfortably loud. Think of the core elements of the Sumerian collapse. First, a dramatic shift in the climate. A megadrought, the 4.2 kilo-year event, altered the very conditions that had allowed their civilization to flourish. We, too, live in an age of unprecedented, human-driven climate change. We watch as coastlines erode, as glaciers melt, as deserts expand, and as, once in a century, storms become a yearly occurrence. Like the Sumerians, our entire global civilization is built on a foundation of predictable climate patterns. We are now discovering just how fragile that foundation is. Second, an ecological trap of their own making. The Sumerians' brilliant invention, irrigation, led directly to the salinization that poisoned their agricultural heartland. They were ruined by the unintended, long-term consequences of their own best technology. We too are brilliant innovators. We have harnessed the power of fossil fuels, industrialized our agriculture, and created a globalized economy of incredible complexity. And we too are now confronting the blowback, carbon-choked skies, plastic-filled oceans, and soil degradation on a planetary scale. A mainstream historical fact is that many fallen civilizations, from the Maya to the inhabitants of Easter Island, show a similar pattern of overexploiting their resource base to the point of collapse. We are not the first to discover that today's solution can be tomorrow's catastrophe. Third, a stubborn refusal to adapt in the face of overwhelming evidence. Remember the Great Wall of Shusen? It was a massive, expensive, and ultimately futile attempt to solve a complex, systemic problem with a simplistic, physical barrier. They focused on a visible enemy, the Amorites, while ignoring the invisible, existential threats of climate change and soil salinity. This should sound eerily familiar. We too build walls, both literal and metaphorical, to address the symptoms of global stress. We argue about refugees and border security, the modern Amorites, while the deeper drivers of that migration, like climate change and resource scarcity, are treated as secondary issues. Historians still argue whether the Sumerian leadership was truly ignorant of the environmental crisis, or if they were simply trapped in a political system that was incapable of long-term thinking. It's a question we should perhaps be asking ourselves, but here's one last quirky, and perhaps the most chilling, parallel. Remember the Sumerian bureaucracy, with its thousands of scribes meticulously recording the declining grain yields on their clay tablets? They had the data. They could see the trend lines. They had a perfect, high-resolution picture of their own demise. And yet, the system as a whole was unable to act on that information to avert the disaster. We are in the same position, but magnified a millionfold. We have satellite data, supercomputer models, and armies of scientists producing terabytes of data that give us an exquisitely detailed understanding of our planetary crisis. We have the clay tablets. The terrifying question is, will we be able to do any more with them than the Sumerians did? The fall of Sumer is not a story about ancient people in a faraway land. It is a cautionary tale, a case study written on the grandest possible scale. It shows us how a complex, sophisticated, and seemingly invincible society can be brought down by the convergence of environmental change and social fragility. It reminds us that our technological prowess does not make us immune to the fundamental laws of ecology. It teaches us that the greatest threats are often the ones that are slow, complex, and self-inflicted. The Sumerians looked to the heavens and blamed their angry gods for their fate. We have no such excuse. We can see the storm gathering, and we know its name, and so our long journey through the dust and glory of ancient Sumer comes to a gentle close. The echoes of the lament for Uar have faded, leaving behind only the soft hum of your fan and the quiet of your room. The ghosts of kings and scribes, of farmers and refugees, can now recede into the deep well of the past, their story told, their warning delivered. Let the vivid images of the ziggurat against a hazy sky, of the white salt glittering on dying fields, and of the silent, abandoned cities begin to soften and blur at the edges. These were scenes of great struggle and profound loss, but they are from a world so very long ago, a story that has now been put to rest. The anxieties of their world need not follow you into your sleep. Instead, let the sheer resilience of the human story be the thought that lingers, the way ideas and culture survived even when the cities that birthed them turned to dust. The thread of human ingenuity, though often frayed, was never truly broken. Allow your breathing to slow, to deepen, to find a calm and easy rhythm. Feel the weight of your body as it settles comfortably, a feeling of security that the people of Uar in their final days could only dream of. The world outside your window is quiet, and you are safe within it. The challenges and worries of today can be set aside, just for now, placed on a shelf until the morning light. Tonight is for rest, for recovery, for the quiet rebuilding that happens in our minds and bodies while we sleep. Let the darkness be a soft, warm blanket, and allow yourself to drift peacefully into your own sweet dreams. Here's a compelling and SEO-friendly final story description for your video. The horrifying truth about the fall of Sumerian cities. The horrifying truth about the fall of the Sumerian cities. Step back in time to the very dawn of civilization, to the land of Sumer, where humanity built its first great cities and invented writing, the wheel, and complex societies. But beneath the glory of Mesopotamia's golden age lies a chilling secret, the horrifying truth behind their sudden and devastating collapse. This video unearths the unexplained mysteries and dark realities that led to the downfall of mighty Sumerian cities like Uar and Uruk. Forget the simple explanations of war or famine. We delve into the shocking archaeological evidence and ancient texts that reveal a more terrifying, insidious force at play. Was it an environmental catastrophe, a forgotten plague, or something far more sinister that brought these pioneering ancient civilizations to their knees? Prepare to uncover the lost secrets and unsettling theories surrounding one of history's most profound unsolved mysteries. This is not just a story of collapse. It's a cautionary tale from the ancient world that resonates even today. What do you believe truly happened to Sumer? Share your theories and reactions in the comments below.